Why shouldn't we treat the querying of U.S. persons out of this Dragnet database, why shouldn't we treat that as a separate Fourth Amendment event requiring some additional process? Maybe a warrant, as Senator Lee has proposed, maybe some other process, but why shouldn't we say, actually, yes, when you go to this massive database and ask about a U.S. person, that's a Fourth Amendment event that requires some process, some scrutiny.
Yes, and so there are two answers to that. One is a legal answer, and we've covered that a lot, but in short, we don't require the FBI agent to get a warrant before going to check the filing cabinet.
Yeah, but this is totally analogous to that, as the Hosby-Drami Court said, right?
Sensitive records.
And as indeed the U.S. Supreme Court said in Riley. I mean, this is a completely analogous to saying that you have a piece of information down in a locker somewhere that you got pursuant to probable cause and indeed a warrant for a particular case. Here you have a massive dragnet of information. You just told me a second ago that you couldn't target the American citizens. So none of this information with the American citizens has received any process whatsoever. But now the FBI or the NSA, whomever, can go and query this database for the first time and get information on U.S. citizens, particularly for the first time, and you're telling me that that's not a separate Fourth Amendment event?
Well, Senator, I don't know what the first time. And when this information comes across the transom, there's an analyst, let's say at NSA, who's monitoring that target, or at the FBI if it's one of their investigations, and they can read the whole thing.
It's the first time that the U.S. person has been the subject of inquiry, though. It has to be under the statute, because you told me a second ago you can't target a U.S. person.
Right.
It's got to be purely incidental. And the statute also says you can't target a foreign person for the purpose of getting information on a U.S. person through the back door. So it therefore follows that when you go to query the database, later query a U.S. person in the database, that's the first time the U.S. person is the subject of the inquiry. And my question to you is, that looks an awful lot like a search and seizure for a Fourth Amendment purposes. Why shouldn't we say, yeah, okay, that's a Fourth Amendment event. We need some additional process around that.
Yeah, and Senator, I think the government has already collected this information. In many cases, an analyst may have sat there and read the email. To me, it seems passing strange to say that someone has a reasonable expectation of privacy still in something that an intelligence analyst has sat there and read as it came across in their collection stream.
It just seems to me you can't have it both ways. You can't say that there's no targeting of U.S. persons that's forbidden under the statute, but then when they do want to actually target a U.S. person, they don't need any process for it. You're saying on the one hand, no process needed on the front end, no process needed on the back end. I just think, Mr. Chairman, this is an extremely, extremely important issue. 278,000 improper queries of Americans in 1 year alone. The idea that we would renew 702 without some sort of reforms to protect U.S. citizens, I think, is just totally irresponsible.